The 6888 was a most phenomenal group of women that you ever want to hear about. They are my heroes and sheroes because they really underwent some horrific experiences and they were discriminated against. Yes, they served their country with honor. The amazing thing about it is they were overseas fighting for equality and then come back home and be treated like a second-class citizen. So I have a lot of admiration for my predecessors.
One of the effects of racial and gender discrimination is silencing. And both today and at the time, hardly anybody knew anything about the 6888. Most Americans wouldn't have known that there were Black women serving at all. The Women's Army Corps was created in 1942 in response to American entry into the Second World War.
I will obey.
And that I will obey
the orders of the President of...
The key to understanding what the WWIIs were is to understand that term corps. A corps is really a military force larger than a division, smaller than an army. And it was perceived that there would be 11 or 12,000 WWIIs. But there were so many volunteers, there was so much interest that the size grew.
But until the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941 made war an actuality, the Army remained an impenetrable world of men.
After Pearl Harbor, there's this immediate recognition of a huge need to increase the size of the military. And in looking for manpower, the administration found woman power. Now, there was a lot of resistance to integrating women into the military. And it was really female members of Congress that created the bills and the pressure to allow for the creation of a Women's Army Corps.
I can assure you that you will be serving the purpose you had in mind when you volunteered as officer candidate for the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps.
Hobby was designated as the overseer over the Black WWIIs that were coming in.
The 6888th was a postal battalion. It was a segregated unit with its own African-American officers, and their job was to sort the mail. It's clear that the women of the 6888th suffered from a dual discrimination, being both women and African-American.
Both sexes were treated as if they were not smart enough to do what their white counterpart would do. So they gave them, jobs like unloading the airplanes or the trucks and things like that, rather than giving them a significant job. But I think that the Black women faced more discrimination than the men did.
When they were training, the women of the 6888th could only use the pool at the training base for an hour every week. The rest of the time was available only to the white women on the base, and the pool was drained immediately after they swam. This is a pretty clear indication of how they were thought of. When it came time for their officers to graduate from officer training school, the names of the graduates were called, and Charity Adams, her name was called last. She's an Adams. Her name should have been right at the beginning, but her name was called last.
Recently, they've discovered that there were at least one person from Puerto Rico and one person from Mexico, so they're no longer identified as the all-Black unit that went overseas. But the 6888 were the unit of 850 women who were mobilized to eliminate a backlog of mail.
Mail matters. It is the lifeblood of morale, and morale is the lifeblood of an army.
Well, if anyone has been in the military, you know the significance of receiving mail, and especially if you've been overseas. It's like your lifeline, when you hear from your family. That's the only connection that you have to your family back home. And their slogan was, no mail, low morale.
During World War II, all you had was physical mail. Physical mail also included packages. It might be food, they might be equipment that the soldiers really needed from their family. They might be mementos that the soldiers are sending home. And if you can imagine a military on the size of the U.S. Expeditionary Force in Europe in 1945, that's a lot of mail to sort. Millions of pieces of mail.
Supposedly have had a 6-month backlog, and they eliminated it in 3 months by working 24 hours a day. And some of the mail only had Junior on it, U.S. Army. I think about 700 of them had Robert Smith on it. They would work with that mail for 30 days. And if they could not resolve where it was going to in 30 days, then they would send it back to the original sender. They worked in horrific situations. They worked in hangars. The windows were darkened. It was rats infested. The rats were there primarily to get the packages that people had shipped in for the cookies and things for Christmas. Out of all the people that I admire, I think that I admire this group of women more, because in spite of the horrific conditions that they were under, they still stuck together and they emerged as dynamic leaders. And I think that has a lot to do with leadership. They were under the direction of Major Charity Adams. I think she was really a force to be reckoned with. It's people like her that has allowed me to get where I am in my military career. She was very, very protective of the women, and there were certain things that she would not allow to happen to them. One thing that stands out in my mind is when one of the commanding officer came to her unit and he wanted to inspect the troops. And so she gathered up the ones that were there and said they were ready for inspection. Well, that wasn't all of them. He wanted all of them. So she explained to them that they had worked the night before and that they would not be in the inspection. So he attempted to get her for insubordination, and he said to her that he was going to bring a white officer in over her troops. And she said, over my dead body. You know, so those words alone during that time period let you know what kind of woman she was. The women, they had character, you know, because a lot of the men thought that they were over there to service them. And they made it real clear that that wasn't the reason that they were there. They had created a Red Cross club, and they wouldn't allow the blacks in there. So they kind of boycotted the club that they had set up for them. So they were very, very, very strong women.
Five years after the war ended, I don't think that the women of the 6th Triple-Eighth would have seen a huge transformation. And the fact is that in general, African American women had to wait a long time, had to put their equality as women almost on the back burner because the civil rights movement in racial terms had to happen first. But we know that 3 African American WACs were assaulted and beaten for being in a white part of a waiting room in a bus station. We know that they were then charged, even after being assaulted, with disorderly conduct. Eventually they were found to not be culpable. I believe the Second World War was a threshold that helped to create the momentum for the civil rights movement in the 50s and the 60s. Changes were beginning to happen, but they'd only be felt 25, 35 years later. The 6th Triple-Eighth clearly don't get enough credit. They don't get their story told well or frequently enough.
Even before the United States started recognizing them, England and France brought them back. It's only very recent that the United States started to recognize them. Few that are left are able to enjoy it, but many of them have passed on without any recognition at all.
I think the saddest thing, and evidence that we're not fully healed or there yet, is the fact that so little is known of this unit. In essence, their story is kind of kept hidden, hasn't been brought out, and I think for us to really come to a point where we recognize their contributions, that's part of the next steps that we have to take to get to the society that they would have wanted.
We went back to Carnegie Hall 2 years ago, and Crescenta Garcia, who's 102 now, was in the audience. And when she stood up, she got a standing ovation. And when I met her, I just started crying because I was so moved to be in the same space as this dynamic woman. It's just unfortunate that so many are not around to, enjoy this. I think the Congressional Gold Medal is something that is long overdue, and I'm just praying that at least a few of them are left to enjoy that.